Peppa Pig. Something in the house. The evening at the pig household was unusually quiet. Peppa and George played in the living room while rain tapped softly against the windows. The dim light flickered and a strange tension filled the air. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the trees like eerie whispers in the night. Shadows from the flickering television danced against the walls, elongating into strange, distorted shapes. Then the door creaked open. Peppa turned quickly, her heartbeat quickening. The door had been closed. She was sure of it. Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig entered, but something was wrong. Their movements were too smooth, too silent, as if they glided rather than walked. Their eyes were empty, hollow voids, and their smiles were unnaturally wide, frozen in place like grotesque masks. The room grew cold. A chill seeped into Peppa's bones, numbing her fingertips. The air thickened, pressing against her chest, as if the room itself were alive. George clutched his dinosaur tighter, his little fingers trembling. The silence between them stretched, heavy with unseen dread. Daddy Pig's head twisted at an impossible angle, his neck creaking and popping as he turned 180 degrees to stare at them. Mummy Pig's posture shifted unnaturally, her body bending too far forward, her arms dangling lifelessly at her sides like a broken puppet. Then came the sound. A rhythmic click-clack of hooves echoed through the hallways, slow and deliberate. The footsteps did not belong to anyone they knew. Peppa grabbed George's hand, her grip firm, and without hesitation they bolted upstairs. Their feet pounded against the wooden steps, the house groaning beneath them. Peppa reached their bedroom, yanked George inside, and slammed the door shut, twisting the lock with shaking fingers. Silence. The handle began to turn, softly at first, then with more force. Peppa pressed her back against the door, willing it to hold. Then a slow, deliberate scratching at the wood. It was faint, methodical, like nails dragging just beneath the surface. A breathy whisper followed, an exhale too close, too deliberate. The shadows in the room began to shift, stretching along the walls in odd, angular shapes, pulsing as though the walls themselves were alive. The air grew colder still, wrapping around them like unseen fingers. Peppa felt her heart hammer against her ribs, her breath shallow and rapid. The house no longer felt like home. It had become something else, something dark, something watching, something waiting. And in the suffocating silence, Peppa knew they were not alone.
Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. Peppa came downstairs for dinner to find her family already seated at the dining room table. But something was terribly wrong. They were all sitting perfectly still, their hands folded in their laps, staring straight ahead with blank expressions. The table was set for dinner, but the plates contained food that Peppa didn't recognize. Dark, shapeless masses that seemed to move slightly when she wasn't looking directly at them. Mummy Pig, Daddy Pig, and George all turned to look at her simultaneously, their movements perfectly synchronized like clockwork dolls. Their smiles were too wide, stretching across their faces in ways that looked painful, and their eyes were completely black, reflecting no light at all. "Sit down, Peppa," they said in unison, their voices flat and emotionless. "It's time for dinner." Peppa approached the table cautiously and saw that her chair was the only one without the strange, moving food. Instead, her plate held what looked like a normal meal, but as she got closer, she realized the food was arranged to spell out words, "Join US." The family continued to stare at her with those horrible smiles, waiting for her to sit down. When she hesitated, they all tilted their heads to the side at exactly the same angle, the movement creating a soft clicking sound like breaking bones. "Sit down, Peppa," they repeated, and this time their voices echoed strangely, as if coming from far away. Peppa noticed that the dining room seemed larger than usual, the walls stretching away into darkness beyond the reach of the overhead light. The family began to eat their strange food with mechanical movements, never breaking eye contact with her, never blinking. As they ate, their smiles grew even wider, and Peppa could see that their teeth had become sharp and pointed. The food on her plate began to rearrange itself, the letters changing to spell out new words. Stay forever.
Peppa Pig, the letters on the wall. It started with a single phrase, a small message, as if scratched by something blunt. On the wall by the stairs, right under the handrail. Daddy Pig first thought George had been playing with a sharp toy block. "Who wrote this?" he asked at breakfast. "Not me," said George. "Me neither," added Peppa. "What does it say?" Daddy Pig frowned. "You forgot me." They thought it was just a childish prank. Mummy Pig wiped the wall with a damp cloth, and the writing disappeared. But the next morning, it showed up again, somewhere else, near the kitchen door. Same words. "You forgot me." "Mummy," said Peppa, "maybe it's leftover chalk. Or someone's drawing at night." "No one's drawing, Peppa. It's just a coincidence." But on the third day, the writing was in Peppa and George's room, right next to the bed, written by a small hoof, tiny letters, crooked pressure, as if whoever wrote it was rushing or didn't know how to hold the chalk. "I didn't write it," Peppa repeated. "I swear." "Maybe you just don't remember," Mummy said gently. "Maybe it happened in a dream." But Peppa hadn't been asleep. She remembered clearly. And that night, she woke up to a soft sound, a scratchy noise, dry, like something scraping against plaster. She sat up and saw the bedroom door slightly open. Light from the hallway fell on the wall. And there, in the shadow, something moved. Peppa couldn't see a face, only a hoof, scraping against the wall again and again. When she turned on her nightlight, the figure was gone. But a new message had appeared. "You erased me." Now the writing showed up every day, in the bathroom, on the wardrobe, under the table, even on the inside of the window glass, all written by one hoof, all saying the same thing. "Who is it?" Peppa asked George. "Maybe it's someone you forgot," he whispered. On the sixth night, Peppa woke up and saw someone writing on the wall right in front of her bed. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The figure didn't turn around, just a shadow, a shape, and when the message was finished, it melted into the darkness, quiet, smooth. "You were me." Peppa shivered. Her eyes moved to the mirror, and she saw a reflection, herself, almost. But the one in the mirror didn't move, didn't blink, just stared, and words began to appear on the glass. "You took my place." In the morning, Mummy Pig called her for breakfast. "Peppa, aren't you hungry?" Peppa didn't reply. She didn't feel like herself anymore. And on the wall above the table appeared one final message, written in that same crooked hoof writing. "Now you are forgotten." This is the story of what happened when Peppa Pig's family went to the beach for what they thought would be a normal day. But sometimes, the most dangerous predators wear the most innocent disguises. It was a sunny day when the pig family arrived at the beach. Peppa was building sandcastles when she noticed strange footprints in the sand. Clear impressions of sneakers leading directly from the ocean onto the beach. "Daddy, look at these footprints," Peppa called out. Daddy Pig chuckled. Someone probably just walked into the water wearing their shoes. But Peppa followed the sneaker prints towards some large rocks. As she got closer, she heard soft, melodic humming. Tra-la-lilo, tra-la-la. Peppa crept around the rocks and gasped. Sitting on the sand was an enormous shark wearing bright blue Nike sneakers, singing happily to itself. Tra-la-lilo, tra-la-la, the shark sang, noticing Peppa. It grinned with rows of sharp teeth. "Hello there! Want to play?" Despite her fear, Peppa found herself playing beach ball with the creature, watching as it skillfully kicked the ball with its sneaker-clad fins. "You're really good at this," Peppa laughed. "Tra-la-lilo, tra-la-la! I love to play," the shark sang back. That evening, a loud knock echoed through their house. When Daddy Pig opened the door, there stood the shark, still wearing its blue sneakers. "Hello, I've come to visit. Tra-la-li-lo, tra-la-la," the shark announced, pushing inside and making itself at home. The shark squeezed through the doorway and began devouring everything at the dinner table. Plates, food, even the tablecloth. "What on earth is happening?" Mummy Pig exclaimed. "I was hungry. Tra-la-li-lo, tra-la-la." It sang with its mouth full. From that day forward, everything changed. The shark decided to stay and established new rules. Everyone had to wear sneakers and sing tra-la-li-lo, tra-la-la throughout the day. The shark took over Peppa's bedroom, forcing her to sleep on a mat. One night, Peppa and George tried to sneak out, but the shark was waiting at the door. "Where do you think you're going? Tra-la-li-lo, tra-la-la, nobody leaves my family." It sang menacingly, dragging them back inside. The house transformed quickly. Windows were sealed with thick glass, water filled the lower floors, and a sign appeared reading, "Danger, aggressive shark inside." Neighbors would walk by and hear singing from inside, "Tra-la-li-lo, tra-la-la." We're all one family now. Through the round window, you could see them, Peppa, George, Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig, all wearing blue sneakers, all singing the shark's song. Behind them, the massive silhouette swam in circles, its toothy grin never fading. And so the shark had found its perfect family. The beach was quiet again, but if you listen carefully, you might still hear it. Tra-la-li-lo, tra-la-la. And if you do, you'd better run, because the shark is always looking for new family members to join its endless song.
Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. Peppa was helping Mummy Pig water the plants in the garden, but the flowers seemed to wilt and turn black as soon as the water touched them. The vibrant green leaves shriveled, and the colorful petals curled inward, revealing thorny, twisted stems. The soil beneath their feet began to crack and crumble, revealing not earth, but a dark, pulsating mass. A low, rhythmic thumping sound emanated from deep within the ground, like a giant heart beating. The air grew heavy with the scent of decay and something sweet, yet sickly. The familiar garden gnomes, usually so cheerful, now had vacant, staring eyes, their painted smiles frozen in a grotesque rictus. The garden, once a place of beauty and life, was transforming into a barren wasteland. The thumping grew louder, and the ground beneath them trembled. Dark, thorny vines erupted from the cracked earth, snaking their way around the wilting plants, their thorns dripping with a viscous, black liquid. The sun, usually so bright, was obscured by a thick, unnatural mist that rolled in from the edges of the garden. The sound of buzzing insects filled the air, but these were not ordinary bees. They were large, black, and their wings beat with an ominous hum. The garden shed, usually a place for tools, now seemed to pulse with an internal, sickly green light. The plants, once their friends, were now turning against them, their thorny branches reaching out like grasping claws. The garden was no longer a place of growth, but of consumption, slowly devouring everything in its path. The thumping intensified, and a large, dark maw opened in the center of the garden, revealing rows of jagged, crystalline teeth. The house, their home, felt miles away, and the garden had become a living, breathing nightmare. Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. Peppa was taking a bath, splashing happily in the bubbles. Suddenly, the water turned murky, then black, and the bubbles began to pop with a sinister hiss. She tried to get out, but her hands slipped on the porcelain, as if the tub itself was holding her captive. A pair of glowing red eyes emerged from the black water, followed by a shadowy, elongated figure. It reached out with a long skeletal hand, its fingers tipped with sharp, black claws. Pause 30 seconds. Peppa screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the gurgling of the drain, which had transformed into a gaping maw. The figure pulled her deeper into the black water, its cold embrace tightening around her. She could hear faint whispers coming from the water, calling her name, inviting her to join its watery grave. The bathroom grew colder, and the shadows danced around her, making the distorted figure seem to come alive. She closed her eyes, wishing it was all a dream, but the cold touch on her cheek told her it was terrifyingly real. Pause 30 seconds. When she opened them again, the water was clear, and the figure was gone, but her reflection in the mirror was not her own. It was the shadowy figure, its glowing red eyes staring back at her, a sinister smile on its face. She knew she was trapped. The house creaked and groaned around her, each sound a chilling reminder of the presence lurking within. She could hear faint whispers, carried on the wind, calling her name. The air grew heavy, and a strange, sweet smell filled the room, making her dizzy. She felt a cold touch on her ankle, and a shiver ran down her spine. Peppa knew she wasn't alone. Pause 30 seconds. The shadows in her room seemed to deepen, twisting into grotesque shapes. She could feel eyes watching her from every corner. The house was no longer a safe haven, but a trap. She pulled the covers over her head, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. She knew she had to escape, but where could she go? The house was alive and it wanted her. She could hear the floorboards groaning, the walls creaking, as if the house itself was closing in on her. The air was thick with an unseen presence, and she felt a suffocating weight on her chest. Peppa knew this was the end. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was her own reflection, now completely transformed, its glowing red eyes staring back at her. It was smiling, and then nothing, just the silence of the house, waiting for its next victim.
It all began subtly. Peppa was the first to notice that her little brother George had changed. At first, it was just small things. He became quieter than usual, stopped laughing, and played less with his favorite dinosaur. He often sat on the floor by the window, tracing shapes on the carpet with his fingers. At first, Peppa thought it was just a game, but then she realized the shapes were always the same. Circles, and in the center of each, two long stretched eyes. "George, what are you drawing?" she asked, trying to peek closer. But he didn't answer. His gaze was empty, as if he wasn't looking at the drawings at all, but sinking somewhere deep inside himself. With each passing day, it grew worse. George stopped responding to her words, ate less and less, and at night, Peppa heard him whispering strange words in his sleep. Sometimes he would get up and stand motionless in the middle of the room, his eyes fixed on the darkness. One evening, he finally looked up at her, and Peppa's heart froze. His eyes were completely empty. The smile stretching across his face was unnatural, alien. "I'm not George anymore," he whispered in a low, hollow voice. One that didn't belong to her brother, but to someone older, someone else entirely. And after those words, he simply melted into the darkness. Peppa screamed, called for her parents, but they only said she must have had a nightmare. The next day, George returned. He sat at the table, eating porridge, as if nothing had happened. But when Peppa met his gaze, he leaned toward her and whispered, "You're next." On the floor lay his dinosaur, torn to pieces, threads sticking out, strange red marks on its body, as if clawed fingers had ripped through it. Peppa could no longer pretend nothing was happening. She noticed something else. In the hallway mirror, George's reflection lived its own life. When George himself sat still, the reflection turned its head and stared at her. Sometimes its lips moved, and one day, Peppa clearly heard, "He is already with us." No adult noticed anything. Mummy and Daddy said everything was fine, that George was healthy. But deep inside, Peppa felt it. Her brother was slipping away into somewhere else, and she was powerless to stop it. A few days later, he was gone for good. His bed was empty. On the pillow lay a piece of paper, the letters jagged and crooked. "He is with us now." Peppa clutched the note, her hands trembling. The house felt colder. The silence hung heavy and thick. That night she awoke to a strange sound. From the bathroom came a droning murmur, but it wasn't water. It was a melody, faint, hollow, as if played on an old radio. Peppa tiptoed down the hallway, each step echoing loudly. She pushed the bathroom door open and froze. Something was crawling out of the toilet. Its body writhed, slick with slime. Its eyes glowed red, and mingled with the bubbling sound was a dreadful melody. The same haunting tune, repeating again and again. Tralalelo, tralala. It seemed to sing, the sound spreading through the pipes, through the walls, straight into her head. Peppa gripped the doorframe, her whole body shaking. The creature was enormous, rising higher and higher, stretching its long arms toward her. Its head tilted to the side, moving slowly, and then it shook, as if to say, "You can't run." Peppa's throat went dry. She tried to scream, but no voice came out. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. The thing slithered closer, its red eyes burning brighter, the melody swelling until it filled the entire house. Peppa stumbled back, step by step, until her back hit the wall. She knew this was connected to George, his disappearance, his words, the strange patterns on the floor. All of it led here. And then she saw him. On the shelf in the hallway sat Labubu, her favorite toy, always harmless before, but now his eyes glowed red and his smile was twisted. He didn't move, yet his gaze said clearly, "You're next." Peppa felt the cold seep inside her. She realized George had only been the first. Now it was her turn.
Peppa Pig, uncontrollable growth. It was an ordinary evening in the pig household. The sun was setting, casting warm rays through the windows of the living room. Peppa and George were sitting on the couch, flipping through a book of fairy tales their mother had given them. The atmosphere was calm, almost too perfect. But deep inside Peppa, a strange feeling began to build, as if something wasn't quite right. She put the book down and stretched, gazing out the window. The sky had turned darker, taking on a purple hue, and the first stars were beginning to appear. But as she stared at the darkening sky, she felt a strange sensation in her chest, as if her heart had skipped a beat. It felt like some sort of pressure, almost as if she felt uncomfortably full. Peppa stood up, rubbing her stomach. It felt like she had overeaten at dinner, but that wasn't the case. Her clothes started to feel tight. The sensation of pressure grew stronger, and she noticed something even stranger. She was growing. At first, it was only a little bit. Her legs tingled and her shoes started to feel tight, but she brushed it off as a trick of the mind. However, the strange feeling didn't go away. On the contrary, it only intensified. Her legs began to stretch. Peppa looked down in horror as her legs grew longer and her pants tightened around her body. She gasped, trying to call for her parents, but her voice sounded muffled, as though something was blocking it. And then she kept growing. Her legs stretched further and her body seemed to expand faster and faster. She could feel her arms and head elongating. She reached for the walls, but each movement made her grow even more. Peppa panicked, trying to steady herself, but with every step, she just got bigger. Soon she was taller than the house, and everything around her felt tighter. The ceiling cracked as her head scraped against it. The walls closed in around her, and Peppa couldn't comprehend what was happening. The world around her seemed so small. Even the floor, which had once felt solid, began to crack under her growing weight. With every step, Peppa became bigger, and it was harder and harder to control her body. Her movements were slow and clumsy, and she felt more out of control with each passing second. The furniture fell apart, the walls crumbled, and she couldn't stop growing. Everything around her felt smaller, and and she felt like a giant moving through a tiny world. Peppa looked around in horror, trying to make sense of it all, but with each moment she felt more helpless. Her body, once light and agile, was now heavy and uncontrollable. She tried to crouch down, but her massive body didn't obey her. Her clothes and the walls around her squeezed in, and she continued to grow, unable to stop herself. As she was nearly bursting through the roof, she felt the house begin to collapse. The walls broke apart, and the ceiling flew off as if made of cards. Peppa stood there, her gigantic body blocking out everything. What was once her home was now destroyed and gone, crushed under the weight of her own growth. She sat in complete silence, surrounded by the ruins of the house, unable to understand how to return to her original size. Her body didn't obey her, and the world around her seemed too tiny and fragile.
The day was damp and overcast. Rain had fallen since morning, and only by evening did it subside, leaving the yard filled with shining puddles and wet grass. Peppa and George ran outside, jumping in the puddles, laughing, building a little tower of stones. Everything seemed ordinary. Inside the house smelled of dinner, and from the kitchen came Mummy Pig's voice. But when the sun finally disappeared, a strange sound drifted from the forest. It wasn't barking, nor the creak of wind. Heavy, dragging breaths, as if something enormous was slowly moving between the trees. Peppa stopped and peered into the thicket. There, in the shadows, stood a tall figure. At first she thought it was a deer, but its steps were too slow, too heavy. Each hoofbeat sent a shudder through the ground. And then Peppa saw the eyes, red, burning like embers in the dark. Massive antlers tangled with branches, as if the forest itself had grown through the creature. "Peppa!" George whispered, clutching her hand. The figure took a step forward. The ground trembled. The children screamed and rushed to the house. Daddy Pig flung open the door and pulled them inside, quickly locking the bolts. In the same moment, the silhouette loomed over the windows, and the antlers scraped across the roof, leaving long scars. The house grew cold, the air thickened, the lamps flickered. In the glass appeared not their familiar reflections, but shadows with crimson eyes. Mummy Pig clutched George, and Peppa felt the walls were breathing, letting in strange sounds. The whisper of branches, the crack of bark. The monster did not leave. It slowly circled the house. Each step left deep hoof prints, and those prints seemed to echo inside as well. The floor shuddered, the walls groaned, the ceiling cracked. The house responded to every movement. Daddy Pig tried to draw the curtains, but the fabric clung to the glass. Beyond the window, there was no yard, only thicket, dense and endless. The moon broke through the branches, and between them, the red eyes flared again. The creature came closer. Its antlers struck the wall, and cracks spread through the wood. Shadows stretched out, forming shapes like hands. Peppa and George pressed themselves against their mother. "He won't leave," Peppa whispered. The monster loomed on every side. Its breath was heard everywhere, from beneath the floor, from the corridors, from the very roof. The air turned icy, and each breath came heavy, as if the house itself lived and breathed with it. In the living room, the light went out. In the darkness, only the eyes remained. They were outside and inside, seen in the windows, in the mirror, even in the black corners of the room. Daddy Pig grabbed the children's hands, but a step backward changed nothing. Behind them, the walls were no longer walls. Instead of wallpaper rose damp tree trunks, and roots pushed up through the floor. The house was turning into forest. Mummy Pig held George tight. Peppa clung to Daddy's hand. All four huddled in one corner, but corners no longer existed. The house dissolved, and the forest took its place. The whisper filled everything. It almost sounded like words, but none could be understood. Only one feeling remained. There was nowhere to go. The last thing the family saw was the creature's antlers breaking through the ceiling and its red eyes reflecting in every window at once. Since then, no one has seen the pig family. Their house still stands in the same place, but on rainy evenings it seems to merge with the forest. Inside it smells of resin and damp bark, stains darken the walls, and pine cones lie in the corners. They say sometimes through the glass you can glimpse reflections, not just empty rooms, but red eyes, unblinking and cold. And in the thicket near the house, children's voices are heard, calling for help. The deer monster no longer returns to the forest. Now he is here, and he waits.
Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. Peppa woke up thirsty in the middle of the night and went downstairs to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was dark and quiet, with only the soft hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. As she reached for a glass, she noticed that all the kitchen appliances were on, their displays glowing in the darkness, but she was certain they had been turned off before bedtime. The microwave showed midnight but was running anyway, its turntable spinning endlessly. The oven was preheating to a temperature that didn't exist on its dial, and the dishwasher was running a cycle that seemed to go on forever. When she opened the refrigerator for water, she found it completely empty except for a single plate covered with a silver dome. Despite knowing she shouldn't, Peppa lifted the dome and found a birthday cake with candles that lit themselves as she watched. The cake was decorated with a message written in frosting that read, "Happy birthday, Peppa," but today wasn't her birthday, and the handwriting looked like her own. As she stared at the cake, the candles began to multiply, covering the entire surface until the cake was more flame than food. The kitchen filled with the sound of children singing "Happy Birthday," but the voices were coming from inside the walls, muffled and distorted. The singing grew louder and more discordant, and Peppa realized that the voices belonged to children who sounded exactly like her, all singing at slightly different speeds. The cake began to melt from the heat of the countless candles, but instead of frosting and cake, thick red liquid pooled on the plate. The singing stopped abruptly, and in the sudden silence, Peppa heard her own voice whisper from behind her, "Make a wish."